It's not every day that you find a missing piece of history while out trekking. Of course, trekking in high-traffic paths will most likely not result in anything breathtaking other than the view, but what happens when you venture into the unknown? A restaurateur named David Tallichet finding a piece of aviation history was exactly what happened to him while walking through the jungles of Papua New Guinea. What was his finding that baffled aviation nuts back at home? But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. David Tallichet is known for a lot of things, but perhaps he's most famous for being the father of themed restaurants. Granted, he wasn't the first person to create such an establishment, but he successfully set a trend that many future restaurateurs would follow suit. His first restaurant was a Polynesian-themed place set in California. But before David entered the world of business and food service, he joined the U.S. Army Air Forces during World War II, where he was deployed to France. He co-piloted a Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress of the 350th Bombardment Squad. He flew more than 20 air missions during his military career. In 1955, while still active in the military, he was tasked with managing the Lafayette Hotel in Long Beach, which hosted the Miss Universe beauty pageant that year. David was lucky enough to strike up a conversation with Miss Indiana, and they officially began dating. Before long, the pair tied the knot and became David and Cecilia Tallichet. David remained active in the military up until 1957, when he was discharged. He loved taking aircrafts to the sky, and his passion for flying didn't die when his military career ended. He'd started his themed restaurant business already, but planes were always in the back of his mind. He loved the skies as much as he did his wife. Some people are content with collecting stamps, coins, or baseballs cards. Not David. His passion for flying soon brought him into the world of purchasing old aircrafts. His success in business allowed him to splurge on expensive decommissioned planes, and he even spent time building replicas of old military craft. Many pieces in his collection were featured in films like Pearl Harbor. David was a true aviator and had a deep pool of passion for planes. He wasn't happy with just purchasing planes from sellers. He wanted to bring old, forgotten relics back to their former glory. The entrepreneur decided that he needed to travel to the locations of dilapidated airplanes, bring them back home, and restore life in them. So what did David do? He knew that traveling through frequently visited hiking paths would not produce his objects of passion. Instead, he decided to book a ticket to the mosquito-infested, underdeveloped lands of Papua New Guinea. Crazy? Indeed. But then again, most geniuses are known to be a bit out of their minds. David was crazy, but not insane. He brought a team of travelers with him to accompany him on his quest to find broken-down planes in the middle of nowhere. Along with the other team members, David made the journey into the wild jungles of Papua New Guinea, into the homes of poisonous snakes and plants. David, as a former member of the military, was equipped with the survival skills needed to make it through the hike. But no matter how prepared you are for a trip into the jungles, there's no doubt that you'll encounter the unexpected. For David, the unexpected came in the form of an old, forgotten aviation relic. How lucky do you have to be to find a missing aircraft on your first ever trip into the wilderness? David Tallichet level lucky. The story of this lost and found aircraft actually begins in 1942 during the peak of World War II. The war was ravaging the planet, taking out millions of people and relocating thousands more. A plan was hatched by the U.S. Army to send Captains Fred Eaton and Harry Harlow on a top-secret, dangerous mission. The 9-member team of war heroes took the craft from Australia through the enemy-ridden airs. It wasn't long before they were spotted by Japanese fighter planes in New Britain when the craft was shot. Things were looking bad for the team and their mission, and they had a very shallow pool of options to go with. The team was left with very few options to choose from, and each alternative did not give them any sense of security. Unfortunately, time was against them as their plane was going down regardless, so they decided to nosedive into the jungles of Papua New Guinea. They knew that these jungles were not friendly to them, and any inhabitants, human or otherwise, would not treat them well. The plane was totaled after the nosediving into the jungle, but thankfully all of the crew was still alive. However, there was no time to celebrate this victory as they were physically weakened by the crash, had a finite amount of resources at their disposal, and were not familiar with the land. With every ounce of strength, they deserted their crashed aircraft and began the arduous trek through hostile territory. The crew of 9 members left the craft and continued by foot to complete their mission. For the rest of the war, the pilots had performed admirably considering what happened to them. But unfortunately, the mission was not a success. As for the crashed plane, it was left to deteriorate in the middle of the jungle. There was no way to bring these people back after the crash, let alone search and rescue the destroyed plane. After the war, nobody knew the whereabouts of the missing craft. The only thing the military understood was that it crash-landed in Papua New Guinea, but the coordinates were unknown. This was the only intact, unretired B-17E bomber, and nobody knew where it was. But David's arrival at the crash site changed everything. David knew that bringing the dilapidated aircraft back home would be one of his biggest challenges. After reaching the crash site, the plane lay abandoned for nearly an entire year before he returned with the proper gear to tie it up and bring it back to the States. However, as anyone could have predicted, this was a lot easier said than done. David and his crew spent months disassembling the B-17E bomber, and they airlifted each piece to a waiting boat by helicopter. David already knew that tearing the plane apart would be difficult, but he hadn't foreseen the problems of airlifting each piece and how much longer he'd have to stay to monitor the process. After taking one of the wings off, they strung it up to the helicopter and prepared for the trip back to the awaiting boat. But disaster strikes at the most inconvenient times. The ropes were not tightened well enough, and as the helicopter was transporting the wing, the ropes snapped and the wing fell. This, of course, meant spending several more hours bringing the wing back to open ground and retying it to the chopper. Finally, after several weeks of hard work, David's crew had successfully transported every piece of the Swamp Ghost. The plane was rebuilt and officially retired. The Swamp Ghost had finally been put to rest after spending decades in the middle of the jungle with nothing but snakes and mosquitoes for company. At long last, the missing aircraft was returned to the States where it was retired. In 2007, David Tallichet, loving husband, successful entrepreneur, and a pilot for all of his adult life, had passed away. He may be gone, but his contribution to the U.S. Army and to the world will never be forgotten.